What up, dude? So here I am in Texas, great state, down south. And this is the final book that I read in 2022. And actually, yeah, it ended the year on a very high note. I really enjoyed this book, but this is Why You Should Read The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. This book is 17 years old, so it's not new by any means. I think, yeah, it was his first book that he made in 2006. So it's old, and I can see how it's his first book. It's not a perfectly written book. It can be a little crude at times, little jumps back and forth. Not the smoothest story in the world. And also, this first book, it starts off definitely a much bigger adventure. It's like, you know, the typical gathering the band together to go on a quest, except the whole book is about still gathering and you don't go on the quest yet. But then the second book, that's when the quest starts, which I'm almost done with as well, and it's been pretty good. So it's definitely an exciting start to an exciting world. Anyways, The Blade itself is considered a dark fantasy, and I think it's true, you know, it can be kind of brutal at times, especially one of the main characters that you're following is Inquisitor Glockter, who is a part of the Inquisition or part of a group, a secret police or just the police system, and they go around and they torture people for questions, and that can be a little bit graphic. And then outside of that, you have different elements. I mean, just one of the whole rules of the magic system is that you can't eat people. So the fact that that's a rule, I feel like, yeah, it can be a little bit dark. Definitely, I think the second book is a little bit more darker than this one. And this one I wouldn't consider to be such a heavy dark fantasy, but it is considered that. Anyways, I have to give credit to Joe Abercrombie. It is definitely, yeah, it's his first one. And I have to say, he knows how to write many different types of characters. You're following, I think, 5 perspectives? And each one of these perspectives are so very different. Like you have Baez, this first of the Magi, who's hundreds of years old, and he has his wisdom, but also he's definitely has his, like a jade or a chip on his shoulder just because of all the shit he's seen. But then you also have this pompous, pompous noble from like the Union, which, you know, Giselle, he's probably maybe not the cleanest of characters. You're just like someone so arrogant, how does he, but you know, I haven't grown up in such wealth, so I can't say that. Maybe that's how I'd turn out if I was rich and like was born in this age. Anyway, so you got Giselle, and then you got like a barbarian from the north and Nine Fingers or Logan, and then you have like this commoner who worked his way up in the military, and Colonel West. And I feel like all these characters coming together, it's crazy how each character feels relatively fleshed out, and you feel like, oh, they have a backstory, they have history, and you get to know this backstory as the book goes on. And I feel like that's why it is a little bit slow as the whole book. If you just take it for itself, it's definitely setting up for this great adventure. But in this series, you're just getting to know these characters and get to know why they exist. But with that being said, I think the characters, it is an 8.7. They are fun. It's adventurous. I don't feel like sometimes when you have books that jump from perspective to perspective, you have like the few characters that you really enjoy, and then you have some characters that you just wish would have less chapters. Not in this case, you definitely have all the characters that you are reading of, you enjoy and you're connecting to. So that's pretty good, and I have to give credit to that. Where it falls a little bit short, I think, especially in this first book, is the world. I did give it a 7.5 because there's definitely a lot of culture and history that you just don't learn in this book, but it gets hinted on, and you're going to now discover more as the series goes on, but in this first book, you don't actually learn so much. It feels like Europe, just smaller, where you have the Union, which can be seen as like Germany, sure, or like France, just the main of Europe, and then you have England, which you can see as England, which is like, you know, up there, and then up top of England, you have the north, yeah, and then on the south, you have Gurkle, which is just Africa, basically, and it's just like, it's very like, and so it doesn't feel like this, it's massive creative in how it's like set up the world, but you start to understand a little bit of the history and how actually the Union came to be, or how the world was created. And there's definitely a lot of mystery and history and culture there, and that, I think, once you start to discover, will make it a little bit more richer. But from this book alone, it just feels like you're in Europe with a little bit different names. Yeah. So 7.5 for World. The plot is an 8.1, or I give it an 8.1. I think it is a good plot. Well, yeah, it's slow. It does bring you into this world where you're starting to learn about these different characters. You're starting to grow about just relating to them. And through this, you're beginning to see how it's actually setting up for something bigger, how this first of the Magi, how Baez is slowly bringing this crew together of unlikely individuals to go on a massive quest. How that will go, no idea, I guess we'll see. But it's bringing these people together, and how it does that is quite good, I would say. I mean, that's basically the entire plot, is how they're slowly coming together and how they meet. You know, they start out alone and then they slowly make their way. And that actually is quite solidly done. It doesn't feel like, oh, plot armor, they mystically popped out and they just happen to run into each other on the road. But it definitely is set up well to the point where they feel like, oh, actually, this is a group that can come together. So I think the plot is relatively solid. It's definitely a setup for something greater. My overall enjoyment was an 8.8. I enjoyed this book. I felt it was an exciting way to end off the year. I thought it's a rich book and it has a lot of history in it, and I'm excited to read the rest of the series. I think he's definitely a solid writer. Yeah, it has some moments where you're like, I don't know if they would say that, or I don't know if that made total sense. But from what I've read now from the second book, it definitely goes a lot deeper and darker. And it starts to really bring you into this world and makes you care. And as you see character development, it's actually quite fantastical and really amazing. But on the first book alone, an 8.8. I did enjoy it quite a bit, and I felt it was a good way to end off my 2022. So my favorite quote from this story, it goes like this: "I need to serve my country," mumbled Giselle. Baez laughed. "There are other ways to serve your country, my boy, than being one corpse in a pile up there in the frozen north. We leave tomorrow." "Tomorrow? But my things are—" "Don't worry, Captain." And the old man slipped off the table and clapped enthusiastically on the shoulder. "Everything is arranged. Your boxes were brought off the ship before it left. You have this evening to pick out some things for our journey. We must travel light. Weapons, of course, and a stout clothes for traveling. Make sure you pack a good pair of boots, eh? No uniforms. I'm afraid they might attract the wrong kind of attention where we're going." So I think right there, it's quite obvious. You have this guy, didn't want to be there, but now he's on this quest. Now he's on part of this group, and they're going off on an adventure. I guess lastly, it does have a magic system. You have some rules. I mean, it is the first book in the first law series, so I guess the first law is important. But yeah, you got these laws that follow, but the magic system is pretty up in the air. You don't really know how it works. Especially in the first book, in this book, you don't really understand how the magic works. It just is there. Baez somehow has control over it, and he seems to be the only one that's able to do anything. Well, him and the other Magi, which there are not a lot of. Actually, there's only like 8, but yeah, so that's cool. But yeah, you don't really understand why they have it. Anyways, it gets more into it later on, but in this first book, it's just there. I think I'm excited to see where it will go and how Joe Abercrombie really brings out this magic system. But in the beginning, you don't really actually understand all too much. But that's it. I think it was an enjoyable. The Blade itself, I do recommend it. I think this is an exciting story. It's definitely maybe a little bit slow just because it is set up for something bigger, but you gotta read the setup to enjoy the payout in the end. So I'll let you know how the whole series goes later on. But for me, it's a solid book. You should read it. All right, cool. All right, I'll see you later. Bye-bye.